Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Jutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. If it's happening on any of these monitors behind me, what you're seeing there are feeds coming into all of our stations and affiliates across the country. So if there's something really interesting happening back there, we're going to bring it to you live right here. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following this morning. The final day of the 2024 presidential race is here, and the latest CBS News Battleground Tracker shows the candidates deadlocked in some key states. We're monitoring the latest from both campaigns. The FBI is warning about deep fake videos meant to trick voters ahead of Election Day. A look at the state of election security and integrity as more voters head to the polls tomorrow. And many have said that democracy is on the line in this election. Later this hour, we take a look at the big picture and where the race stands. This is CBS News 24/7. Channeling the band Europe, it's the final countdown. Election Day is tomorrow, and the race is coming down the wire as both candidates hone in on some crucial battleground states that could tip the scales for the presidency and control of Congress. Vice President Harris is focusing her attention on Pennsylvania today with star-studded get-out-the-vote concerts in both Pittsburgh and Philly. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is also headed to the critical swing state today. He will also campaign in Michigan and in North Carolina. Here's a live look, actually, from North Carolina, where we're expecting the former president to speak very, very shortly. We'll bring those remarks to you as soon as he starts speaking. Meanwhile, during a rally yesterday in Pennsylvania, the former president noticed an opening in the ballistic glass that protects him during outdoor events, and he suggested that he would not mind if someone shot at members of the press. Listen.
To get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much. I don't mind.
CBS News campaign reporter Libby Cathy is following the Trump campaign. Libby, my guess is that you, or at least some of our colleagues, were in the crowd yesterday when the former president was speaking. What was the reaction? I'm curious. We know that Donald Trump has used violent remarks and language that some deem unpresidential in his campaign rallies. But I'm curious how the audience reacted when he made that comment.
Yeah, good to be with you, Vlad. Well, my colleagues, Olivia Rinaldi and Jake Rosen were there in the audience. And when this comment was said, it really rattled reporters, obviously, but the crowd seeming to enjoy it, kind of cheering along with Trump. Now, this is just one part of an escalation of rhetoric we've seen from the former president in the closing days of his campaign. He also said there, in addition to saying, joking about someone shooting through the press, he said he shouldn't have left the White House in 2020. People saying this language is really concerning. And while some on the campaign say, let Trump be Trump in these closing days, there are others who say they're concerned that this could hurt him with Republican voters who have not yet made it to the polls yet, with undecided voters. So it's really to be seen here, Vlad, but absolutely rattling those comments last night. People shaken by them, and we will see if he continues to double down on them here today in Raleigh.
You've been traveling with the Trump camp for some time, Libby. One of the things that is always interesting, because the former president, is so keen on highlighting and pumping up the numbers of people that attend his rallies. What is the size of the crowd there today? Because one of the things that I noticed back in 2015, 2016 is the crowds for former President Trump before he was elected the first time around grew almost every week leading up to the election. I feel like we're seeing that with Kamala Harris. And there have been some reports that the crowd sizes have been dwindling at Trump rallies, including for J.D. Vance. So I'm just curious. I know the cameras are trained in a particular spot there, but what's the size like around you?
You're exactly right, Vlad. We have seen this trend with Trump campaigns, kind of the opposite of what we saw in 2020 and 2016. The crowd sizes have been kind of dwindling. This is the 5th event in North Carolina where he has not filled this arena so far. I'm looking over here. I'm looking behind me. You can't quite see it, but there are empty seats here. And now I know this arena's capacity is 7,500 people. That includes the floors on the seats on the ground. It's 5,000 people just in the arena seats, and that's several thousand people. Also, it's a Monday morning, we'll note. But no, the crowd is not full here, and this is one of several events in the last couple of days where in North Carolina he has not filled the arena.
Yeah, I can even see behind you there, Libby, on the sides there. It looks like there are a lot of empty seats. Again, this was just something that I remarked back in 2015 as the Hillary Clinton campaign seemed very enthusiastic about their chances of winning the presidency. And I just thought to myself, wow, Trump is getting thousands and thousands of people at his rallies. She might not win this. So it's an interesting observation there from you in North Carolina this morning. Libby Cathy, always great to have you. Thanks, Libby. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris's campaign is gearing up for a star-studded campaign finale in the state of Pennsylvania. CBS News' Battleground Tracker shows Harris and Trump are effectively tied in that state and other key swing states. Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes up for grabs, making it an important prize in this historical race. During a Michigan visit yesterday, she spoke to those voters who have not yet cast a ballot. Listen.
I would ask, in particular, people who have not yet voted, to not fall for his tactic, which I think includes suggesting to people that if they vote, their vote won't matter. Suggesting to people that somehow the integrity of our voting system is not intact so that they don't vote. And again, I think that it is a tactic. It is meant to distract.
CBS News campaign reporter Aaron Navarro is in Allentown, where Harris is heading in just a few hours. So, Aaron, close in many swing states, are so close in many swing states, rather. What was the strategy to stay in Pennsylvania on the last day before the election?
Vlad, good to be with you. We're going to see the vice president really blanket the state, starting in the Latino corridor, including Allentown, before going to Reading. We'll see her in Scranton as well. And she needs to be here in the state. Just from talking to Democratic officials, they think that the Rust Belt, the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, is her clearest path to 270 electoral college votes. Now, the toughest state in the blue wall has been Pennsylvania. Our poll has her tied here. Polls the past couple months have shown it to be tied here. And it's really hard to see a path for Harris to 270 electoral college votes without winning Pennsylvania. Yes, they are playing in the Sun Belt states. Yes, they are playing in the southern battlegrounds of Georgia and North Carolina. But numbers-wise, they need to get the turnout in the blue wall. Pennsylvania is a big anchor of that.
So, Aaron, let me ask you about the rallies over the weekend. What are you seeing as far as crowd size and enthusiasm?
In terms of the crowd size, I was in Atlanta for a rally on Saturday. About 12,000 attended that, people on the outskirts beyond where the general crowd area was. And it's been consistent the past couple weeks, approaching 10,000. They're surpassing it for these events. We're expecting to see a big crowd for her in Philadelphia. But the message from Harris has been interesting in the last couple weeks. It's voicing confidence. Gone is the talk of her talking about how she is the underdog in this race. We now are hearing her say, while we have work to do, in her words, that she is confident they can win this election. And just from talking to people in Wisconsin, I'm still getting some nervousness, of course, on how this is all going to turn out. But I'm also getting hope from the voters I'm talking to that she will pull it off. We'll see in a matter of days.
All right, Aaron Navarro for us this morning. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is holding a news conference in Atlanta on voting in the state ahead of Election Day. Let's watch.
In the next few days, you may see some extra drama from fringe activists. They are certainly dramatic, aren't they? Whatever they say or do, we know this to be true. Here in Georgia, it is easy to vote and hard to cheat. Our systems are secure, and our people are ready. Your local election officials will work around the clock tomorrow to ensure everything runs smoothly. If you're one of the 4 million voters who have voted early, congratulations. You have made history. But you've also dispelled Stacey Abrams' false narrative that it's hard to vote here in Georgia. That's 4 million votes, 4 million voters. This is what we have known this entire time. Georgia has short lines, secure elections, 4 million voters voted without issue. And that is something that we can be proud of as Georgians. If you haven't voted yet, I want you to go to the My Voter page, the portal that we have at mvp.sos.ga.gov. If you just Google My Voter page, Georgia, it'll pop right up. And then you can look up your specific precinct. And that's important because tomorrow you have to vote in your precinct up until 5 p.m. tomorrow. All eyes are on Georgia once again. And just like our Georgia Bulldogs, go Dogs, that was a great comeback, wasn't it? You guys were, some of you doubted. I know you did. But anyway.
All right, the Secretary of State in Georgia on election security. Bottom line, the systems are secure. That is the message to voters as they head to the polls tomorrow. Meanwhile, new FBI warning about false videos on election security meant to trick voters is getting a warning from folks. They warn that these two videos over the weekend that falsely claimed to be from the FBI on election security, they are false. One mentioned the apprehension of groups committing ballot fraud. The other had to do with the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff. The FBI stressed that the videos are not authentic, they are not from the FBI, and that the content that they are showing is also false. CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga is joining us now from Washington to talk more about this. So, Nicole, FBI didn't attribute these videos to any specific actors, but there are clearly forces trying to undermine the election, most of them abroad.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Vlad. And the intelligence community, by the way, is telling Americans now, be prepared for a disinformation storm ahead of the election and in the days after. And in another joint statement on Friday, the U.S. government didn't pin, fabricated videos that purported to show Haitians voting in Georgia onto any one specific group, but they did assess that state actors were linked to Russia. That video and others, including some of the ones you mentioned, have been part of a pattern of the sort of Moscow manufactured media that's intended to undermine confidence in our election system. They're essentially designed to exacerbate mistrust in the U.S. government. And officials in that same statement on Friday said not only do they expect that Russia will create even more media content both in the lead up to Election Day, but also in the weeks and even in the months after it. U.S. officials, though, here have been aggressive in calling out some of these videos. I mean, historically, this kind of intelligence can take months to declassify. That warning on Friday that we're talking about came out just 11 hours after the propaganda turned viral. So certainly we've seen an effort by U.S. officials to try to fact check and debunk some of this in real time.
So, Nicole, we're seeing ballot boxes set on fire in places like Portland. We're seeing missing ballots in Erie, Pennsylvania. Again, Pennsylvania is such a crucial state in this election for both the vice president and the former president. We know we can't put guards at every ballot box in America, but how are they being monitored as we head into Election Day?
Yeah, Vlad, our election system is decentralized. Every state and even some counties have their own rules and procedures. And yes, it can mean that oftentimes these challenges present as confusing, but more importantly, having a decentralized system of elections also keeps us safe. So let's take these examples one at a time. In Oregon and Washington state, 2 arson attacks likely linked to the same suspect, according to police, did result in damaged ballots in Portland. There were 3 in Portland and roughly 500 damaged ballots in Clark County, Washington. And officials there have been reaching out to voters directly, contacting them to inform them of what happened. And in Washington, anyone can check their ballot status online at votewa.gov and request a new one, or just show up at that Clark County local election office. And already election officials there have told us voters have been vigilant. They've been following through on that. And of course, police and security around those ballot boxes have been bolstered. In Pennsylvania, a state judge found that a mail ballot vendor contracted by Erie's County Board of Elections failed to meet the demands. Roughly 13,000 to 17,000 Erie County voters may not have received their ballot in time for Tuesday. That's a significant number in a swing state, but a state judge has ordered the Board of Elections to keep its offices open on Friday and Saturday for voters to be able to request to fill out ballots. Also ordered that the county add another printer to ensure an adequate number of ballots were available. So these challenges are being addressed on a case-by-case basis, Vlad.
All right, Nicole Skanga for us this morning. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Be sure to stay with CBS News all day tomorrow for coverage of Election Day. We'll have live reports from our election headquarters in New York and from our teams spread out across the country. And remember, special coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7. Talk about weather now. People in Oklahoma are being told to brace for the possibility of more severe weather after tornadoes ripped through the state. The National Weather Service says at least 6 tornadoes touched down over the weekend. Much of the damage was reported in and around Oklahoma City. Dozens of homes and businesses were destroyed or damaged, and close to 100,000 customers lost their power. Let's bring in CBS New York meteorologist Tony Sadiku with the first look at the national forecast. Tony, good to see you, my friend. So give us a sense of the forecast for Election Day tomorrow.
Hey there, Vlad. So things will be moving towards the east over the next couple of days, so there could still be some wet weather, but you saw some of the video there across Oklahoma. The issue is there are more active storms that are brewing across the same areas that had a rough weather. By the way, 7 tornado reports over the past 48 hours. The National Weather Service confirming preliminarily that 2 of them are EF3 or stronger. And you can see wet weather continues across parts of the area. Want to quickly show you the severe outlook today that then pushes towards the east tomorrow. Right now, it looks like the worst weather is going to be basically along the I-44 corridor from Oklahoma City towards like Springfield, Missouri, stretching down towards the Metroplex. All modes of severe, from tornadoes to damaging winds, and also large hail of possibility in some of these areas. Not to mention, a lot of you have already seen some significant rain. So some areas, half a foot of rain, and adding more will create a flooding issue. Quick check on the tropics. Area could develop just north of Hispaniola, 20%. That's down the road. The new thing is tropical depression now 18, likely to become Rafael. Vlad will take a closer look at that track as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico later this week. Coming up.
All right, Tony Sadiku, thank you, friend. Appreciate it. A new poll out of Iowa shows voters in that typically red state, at least recently, could lean blue in this presidential election. Details coming up. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. It's the presidential poll that got everyone buzzing this weekend. The Des Moines Register puts Harris at 47%. Among likely voters compared with Trump's 44%. The difference is within the margin of error, but it may signal a potentially historic moment. Amanda Rooker is the chief political reporter for KCCI out of Iowa, and she joins us live from Des Moines this morning to talk about it. So break down this poll for us and why so many people have historically watched it and what it signals.
Vlad, great to be with you. As you mentioned, this poll is one that has historically been one to watch. If you look back over the years, it is very accurate. I think that Ann Selzer really hasn't been more than 5 points off since 2012. So this is a poll that everyone watches right before the election. Why it may be so surprising, despite the fact that the gap is so small, is, as you mentioned, Iowa has largely been seen as a solidly red state. Trump won solidly in 2016 and 2020 in Iowa. He just had a record-breaking performance in the Iowa caucuses here. And so most people imagine that Trump would sail to victory in this presidential election until this poll came out. Now, what's driving those numbers? I think one thing to watch is age and gender. The poll found that among women over the age of 65, they support Harris over Trump by a 35-point margin, which is quite large. You also look at politically independent women. They also go towards Harris. And I think the poll really picked up that movement. Now, the poll doesn't dig into much, what is driving that shift among those women. I think one important thing to remember is that a 6-week abortion ban took effect in Iowa this summer. That's something that Democrats have been campaigning heavily on. And in my reporting, talking with Republican and Democratic strategists, they believe that this poll might be an indication that that messaging is resonating with voters here.
Let me ask you what it also signals, perhaps, for what we in the media and others in politics have called that blue wall in the Midwest. Does the positive numbers that Des Moines Register poll showed this weekend bode well for the vice president in those upper Midwestern states?
Well, it's hard to tell, Vlad, right? We'll know on election night, but I think that's why this poll maybe set off a political earthquake, a mini political earthquake maybe, because there is, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, these are crucial states for Harris to win over. And if she is doing well with, white Midwestern voters, particularly independent women, older white Midwestern voters, that could bode well for her in those other battleground states. Also, Iowa was a state that no one expected Harris to carry. And so if she's doing well here, could that bleed over into some of the other states? We'll know on election night, but I think this is a great sign for the Harris camp.
Yeah, it's been a lot of it has been made about in 2020 how black women helped put Joe Biden over President Trump in that race. In this case, Amanda, it almost seems as if it's not just black women, but also white suburban women that might do the same for the vice president. Amanda Rooker, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All All right, now to the fight for the control of the U.S. House. There are several key races in the House of Representatives that may be influenced by the presidential election, including the race for mid-Michigan. Paul Young is the Republican candidate running for Michigan's 8th. He's going up against Democrat Kristen McDonnell-Rivet. This is the seat left open by retiring Congressman Dan Kildee. Let's bring in the Republican candidate, Paul Young, to discuss. So, Paul, when you're on the campaign trail, what are some of the deciding factors that voters are telling you that they're worried about, specifically in Michigan? I know there are some national issues that people care about, but what about in your district?
Well, Vlad, I've been campaigning now for almost a year here in Michigan's 8th district, and what I hear pretty consistently from voters is their number one concern is inflation and the affordability of everyday things they need. They need gasoline, they need groceries, they've got to pay their rent, and they've seen those prices go up, and they just feel like their monthly income doesn't stretch to the end of the month. And there's also a general feeling of unease, of safety and security in their communities, so much of that driven from a lawless southern border. So those are two of the main issues I'm hearing from voters as I'm campaigning throughout the district.
As you know, the presidential election polls are very, very tight in your state, showing that the vice president has a slight edge over the former president. The question that I always have when I talk to people in down ballot races is, does the top of the ticket add some wind in your sail, or is it a drag on what you're trying to do there?
Look, I think in everything I've seen from the political science of these matters is that the top of the ticket does matter. And I've seen polls in the state of Michigan that put President Trump in the lead and other polls that put Kamala Harris there. It's a close race. The good news here for me in Michigan's 8th district is that Donald Trump tends to be doing a little bit better in Michigan 8 than he does statewide. So even if the polls show that the race is tied, I feel like Donald Trump is going to win Michigan's 8th district, and that's going to be good for my campaign. But whatever happens in the presidential election, it's also important that a candidate get out and talk with voters, and that's why I've been working hard over these last 11, 12 months to speak with voters and address their concerns.
All right, Paul Young, good luck, sir. Thank you very much for taking some time to spend with us.
Thanks for having me.
And just for those who are keeping track, in our 11 o'clock hour, Elizabeth Cook will speak with Paul Young's opponent in this crucial race in Michigan. That's Kristen McDonnell-Rivet. Stay tuned to CBS News 24/7 for that conversation in just about an hour. All right, Vice President Harris has garnered a slew of celebrity endorsement in recent weeks, but do her star-studded rallies help, or do they hurt her connections with everyday Americans? Rhode Island Democratic Congressman Gabe Amo is a Harris campaign surrogate. He is joining us live from Providence. Congressman Amo, you know a thing or two about swing state voters. In just the last month, you've crisscrossed everywhere from Macon, Georgia, to Michigan and many states in between. This is something that's always kind of interesting to people who watch politics. Do those celebrity endorsements matter? In some cases, my suspicion is that they often don't, but they can have an effect. For example, when that comedian made the joke about Puerto Ricans and Puerto Rico at Madison Square Garden, we know that if you're somebody like Bad Bunny, who's got some 20 million followers across social media, something that he says may give an edge to the vice president. What's your take?
Well, ultimately, I think endorsements of all types, including celebrity endorsements, are indicative of momentum, and they can help propel something that's already moving in the right direction. And that's what we see with Vice President Harris and her campaign. We are building steam. It's not just, Eminem and Bruce Springsteen, but it's 1.4 million people on the doors in Pennsylvania this weekend. It all contributes to the trend line. This is going to be a close race, but the edge is with the candidate who is bringing people together. And that is only one choice here in this race, and that's Vice President Kamala Harris.
And as you know, we've only got a little less than 24 hours to go. Tonight, the campaign has another big moment lined up. We're talking about Oprah Winfrey, Lady Gaga. Can you describe the vibe in those spaces when the vice president appears? I mean, I watched her on Saturday Night Live this weekend, and the applause, the sustained applause for her appearance was pretty significant. It's been the same way when other presidential candidates have appeared on that show, whether it's Hillary Clinton or former President Trump. But I just want to get a sense from you of when you're talking to people who are waiting in line, some cases hours before the gates open up, what the vibe is.
Well, I was at a major rally for the vice president in Georgia a few weeks ago, and I could feel it. The energy was palatable. And what you see here is that we have valid, trusted stakeholders, validating rather the energy, the message that the vice president is putting forward. But also, what's happening in those spaces is finding community and building together for the page turning that we need in this election. The vice president talks about a new way forward. We have had Donald Trump focus on himself and his enemies list. The vice president is talking about practical things, her to-do list to impact the American people, from home ownership to making sure that we all have our freedoms protected. And so when you look at that contrast, people are optimistic, they're hopeful, they're positive. She's going to be a president for all people, and that's what these events build to, because people show up at these things and then they become evangelists. They tell their friends, they tell their neighbors, and that's how we're going to win this election.
Congressman, just one last question in 30 seconds or so. Can you just tell me, the issue that Hillary Clinton's camp had is they got a little bit too into the enthusiasm that they were seeing on the campaign trail, which left them blind spots in some places that they needed to be. Any lessons learned from that campaign?
100%. Look, as Jay-Z says, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. The numbers here of people on the doors, on the phones, at events, this is a campaign that is building, and it's going to culminate from the early vote into a strong election day performance where margin of error, a race in 7 states. That means we are close, but we have the momentum, and Vice President Harris is going to deliver a victory because of the American people wanting to move forward.
I love it. Congressman quoting Jay-Z. Yeah, great. Congressman Amo, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we're going to take a look at the big picture of the presidential race with just one day to go. We'll be right back. All right, back to the Election Day countdown. Nearly 80 million Americans have already made their choice for president, but by all accounts, this race is far from decided. As we get ready for our wall-to-wall coverage tomorrow, I want to take a minute, step back, and look at the big picture for this race. So let's bring in CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent, Major Garrett. Major, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, my brother.
How are
Welcome
you?
to the space here,
Thank
Studio
you.
55.
Thank you. I love your tech lair.
It's very much a lair. So let me ask you, over the weekend, this Iowa poll broke. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. This morning, I was in the green room of CBS Mornings talking to Republican strategist Terry Sullivan.
Yes.
And I said, hey, this poll had sort of a seismic effect on the people who watch this stuff. And he said, Ann Seltzer, who's a fabulous pollster, he's like, she's great, but there is a mystique around her numbers that may not be often warranted.
Sure.
Because she gets it wrong just as many times as other people get it wrong. What do you say to that?
Ann Seltzer got it right in 2016 and 2020 in Iowa. Her polling had more Trump support than was visible in other public polls and more visible nationally. Same thing in 2020. She has been spot on with every presidential poll she has done in this millennia, except for one in 2004. She had Kerry ahead of Bush. Bush won Iowa narrowly. Every other poll she's done, statewide in Iowa, right before the presidential election, has been very, very close. And so she was ahead of the curve on Trump in 2016 and 2020. She's now ahead of the curve, if you will, on Harris. Harris doesn't need to be up by 3 in Iowa, Vlad, for this to be a signal. If Harris is within 4 in Iowa, which Trump has won by 8 and 10, that's indicative of a shift in the electorate's enthusiasm, composition, and orientation. And if she's within 3 or 4 in Iowa, she's probably ahead 2 or 3 in Wisconsin, 3 or 4 in Michigan, maybe 3 or 4 in Pennsylvania. That's why it's a potential signal that I think we need to pay attention to. What Ann Seltzer does in her polling is not model the previous election. She tries to anticipate the composition of the electorate in the election to come. That's how she got Trump in 2016 and 2020. She wasn't looking back at returns from 2012 and 2016 or at 2016 and 2020. She's trying to understand through enthusiasm measurements the shape of the electorate to come. She calls it polling forward, not polling backwards.
That's fascinating. So then so people who watch this stuff, and perhaps younger Americans who are going to the polls for the first time, they're trying to understand why a small state like Iowa matters so much, not just in the primary process, but even now by this poll. What does it signal for the rest of the Midwest?
It might signal that women responding to the end of Roe versus Wade and the Dobbs reality as lived out in Iowa, 6-week abortion ban, Texas and elsewhere, not only identify this issue in a higher level of priority than they ever have before, but it becomes a kind of umbrella look into all sorts of related issues. Not just reproductive health care, but health care writ large, and it can cross generations. This is definitely something Ann picked up in Iowa. Older voters in Iowa who are women, for whom abortion is not a direct issue, but they think about their daughters or granddaughters. They think about this in a generational sense because it's such an epic change. Something that was assumed to be in the Constitution, at least protected as a constitutional right for 50 years, was altered, and states rewrote their understanding of those rights. That is, I think, the biggest shift in what's happened in America from the 2020 presidential election to this one. This is the first presidential since Roe was overturned. And I have to think we have to understand, I'm going to argue we should understand, that this is the biggest unknown variable and how it will move people, how it will change the composition of the vote, how it might change the orientation of this election among men who hear their girlfriends, spouses, mothers, grandmothers talk about this issue in a different way. And they may internalize it in a different way that polls have yet to evaluate.
And very quickly, in every instance that a abortion issue has appeared on the ballot, whether it's a blue state or a red state, what's the result generally?
Not only is it passed, it has performed better than the polls measured before the election occurred.
Meaning pro-abortion,
protecting abortion rights. And the polling of those questions has tended to undercount what the ultimate outcome was. So one of the things that makes the Trump people very happy is he's polling even. He's never polled even. He didn't poll even in 2016 or 2020, so they think he's going to jump up. Well, what if polling is actually capturing Trump now, but not capturing this other force?
Wow. Fascinating. Major Garrett, so good to have you here, my friend. Always great to have you here. Thank you very, very much. So both Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are in Pennsylvania today. It is the Vice President's 18th visit to the state. It is the former President's 25th trip to the Keystone State as they battle for those 19 delegates who could determine the outcome of the presidential election. This, of course, comes amid new CBS News polling that shows the vice president and the former president tied among likely voters in swing states. So for more on the role of Pennsylvania in this election, I want to bring in CBS News Pittsburgh political reporter John Delano. John, I don't know if you were able to hear a little bit of that conversation that I was having with Major Garrett there, but I want your take on that because when we talk about that blue wall in the Midwest, we're talking about, Pennsylvania, right? That is, whichever way this election goes is the way Pennsylvania is going to go. So help me understand what this poll in Iowa means if you are watching this race in Pennsylvania.
Well, first off, Vlad, always great to be with you. No doubt about it, Pennsylvania is the epicenter of this election, and I'll tell you why, particularly for Democrats. Can you name the last Democrat elected president without Pennsylvania? Frankly, you have to go back to Harry S. Truman was the last Democrat to win the White House without carrying Pennsylvania. We are absolutely critical as a state for the Democrats. The Republicans, George Bush lost Pennsylvania and still won the White House. But there have only been two in recent years, George Bush and Richard Nixon, who both lost Pennsylvania. Every other Republican who won the White House carried Pennsylvania. So that's why we are the epicenter of so much attention, aside from the Electoral College votes, 19 that we have here. I think Major Garrett is absolutely right. The whole question of where women are going in Pennsylvania, and we're not talking just African-American women, but particularly white suburban women. We're watching that both in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and the major urban areas of the state, and whether or not they are coming out in force tomorrow to vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. That's a key indicator. There are obviously other groups that are important. African-American vote in Philadelphia is so key to a Democratic victory. And of course, the turnout in the vast majority of counties in Pennsylvania that is Trump territory, that's going to be key as well. So there's a lot up in the air at the moment. It's no wonder the CBS poll shows it dead even in Pennsylvania.
So, John, let me ask you one last question then. Again, people, when we think about what's going to happen tomorrow, we always say, well, we know that certain states are going to be called early, and a couple of other states that people are watching are, for example, North Carolina and Georgia, which tend to report the result fairly early. People who don't know Pennsylvania or who don't understand how it works in politics want to know, why does it take so long for Pennsylvania's results to come out? Because we could be talking about a couple of days before we get the final tally. Explain that for us.
Well, I think, for one thing, we're measuring this against 2020, and things have changed since 2020. We don't have as many mail-in votes to begin with. That's important because we don't have COVID. Secondly, our elections departments in 67 counties have now had experience with mail-in voting. And so I guarantee you that Allegheny County, that's greater Pittsburgh, is going to report its votes certainly by early morning, Wednesday morning. Philadelphia was the county that took forever and ever to declare a winner. And that is a key, because there's so many people there. That's so key. They're telling us that they're going to be much faster in 24 than they were in 20. And so I think part of it is just the experience of doing all this. I also think same-day voting gets counted quickly. We're going to have more same-day voting in Pennsylvania than ever. So I think that's going to make a difference as well. What?
We'll be watching, and I know you will as well, John. Thank you very, very much for spending some time with us. Appreciate it. And be sure to stay with CBS News for all-day coverage tomorrow, Election Day. We'll have live reports from our election headquarters in New York and from our team spread out across the country. And remember, special coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7. All right, let's show you a live look right now at the former president's running mate, J.D. Vance. He's speaking to some reporters there. You can see it happening right behind me, this side, this side. There's a jib here, folks. It's a camera with a very, very long arm, and that's what it's showing you here. Over here, we can see J.D. Vance in La Crosse, Wisconsin. We're going to bring you any headlines as they come out of this event. Meanwhile, we'll take a break. We'll be right back. You're looking at a live look right now in Raleigh, North Carolina, where the former president's son, Don Jr., is speaking to the crowd there. They look very enthusiastic. As soon as the former president takes to the stage, we'll bring those remarks to you here. Meanwhile, there could be a wave of legal challenges to challenge the outcome of the 2024 election, and some might find their way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2020, the Trump campaign and its surrogates filed dozens of election challenges. Only one was successful. Let's turn to CBS News legal correspondent Jan Crawford to talk about what might happen in this election. So Jan, give us a sense of the types of cases that could get kicked up to the Supreme Court, and which ones would probably not rise to that level.
Well, you know, Vlad, we've already seen a number of cases going up to the Supreme Court because the Republicans have really changed their strategy this go around, and they're filing a lot more lawsuits before the voting actually happens, before Election Day, as opposed to after the fact. So the court's already had a couple cases where they've been asked to look at, for example, rules on what kind of votes would count after certain deadlines, or how ballots have to be submitted, and whether or not provisional ballots can be required, and dating on that, or also how states manage their voting rolls and their efforts to take voters off the rolls that they believe may be ineligible. So we've seen a couple of those cases. Those are really narrow. One case last week from Pennsylvania, 3 of the conservative justices wrote separately to say, like, this is a really narrow case. And generally the court's message, the Supreme Court's message, and the message it sends to the lower courts is, courts, you need to stay out of this unless you absolutely have to, because it is so close to the election. So that's something I think you're going to see. Courts are going to be reluctant to step in unless they absolutely have to. And I can tell you what, Vlad, this Supreme Court has made very clear they do not want to be deciding the outcome of this election. And honestly, I think we have to think what would happen if they had to do that. It's not 2000 and Bush versus Gore anymore, and I think there is a really significant concern that if the court were to have to get involved after the fact, after the election, would people respect that decision? I don't know the answer to that. It's kind of an indictment of the times we're in, I think.
100%, Jan. And we've been making a lot about how both campaigns have lawyers ready to go. But is there a difference in, I don't know how to, maybe, I'm trying to think of this question, Jan. You could probably think of it better than I can. But is there a difference in the approach that the Trump campaign would have versus the Harrison campaign and the Democrats? I mean, both are ready to fight those legal battles, but it feels like, at least to a lot of people, that there's a different tactic that they would use in challenging results of this election.
You know, that's a great question, and it's kind of hard to quantify because we've seen the RNC really taking the lead on some of the pre-election litigation, so it's a little easier to say. The Republicans are filing lawsuits here, there, and elsewhere. On the Democratic side, we're seeing certain groups, other groups filing some of these lawsuits, like the ACLU or various other civil rights groups. So they're both, it's all hands on deck.
All right, Jan Crawford for us, as always. We love having you, Jan. Thank you. Legendary music producer Quincy Jones has died at the age of 91, and coming up, we're going to look at the life and the legacy he left behind. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The Grammy, Tony, Oscar, and Emmy Award winner had worked with just about everyone in music, from Frank Sinatra to Michael Jackson to Quincy Jones to Ella Fitzgerald to Ray Charles to Ella Fitzgerald. Let's bring in Joe Levy. He's a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, and he joins me now to talk about this. Joe, great to see you, my friend. There's no one else in the world that I would want to talk about Quincy Jones than you. Just if you could describe for us just how towering of an influence he was as someone who was able to cross genres and styles of music in a way that hadn't really been seen when he started doing it back in the 1950s.
An absolute titan of the 20th century in the world of music. And it's good that you stream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it would take that long to talk about his achievements. Here's somebody who started in the world of jazz as a trumpet player, as an arranger, working with giants like Count Basie, worked through the world of pop as a producer, became the first Black vice president of a white label at Mercury, a label that he signed Leslie Gore to, went on to score movie after movie, including The Wiz, where he met a young Michael Jackson, with whom he would eventually produce the biggest selling album of all time. That, of course, is Thriller, and that is an album that changed the sound of music in the 1980s, as well as the scale of ambition inside the music industry. And Vlad, it's not just that. He's one of the founders of Vibe magazine. So he's got an imprint on hip hop and an imprint on hip hop musically as well. His music was sampled by artists like Tupac, De La Soul. I could go on and on.
Joe Levy, you just encapsulated a remarkable career and an unpopular opinion which has been blowing up my Twitter feed. I am one of the rare ones who says Off the Wall was a better album than Thriller, at least to me. It's an unpopular opinion, and I stand by it.
I've got your back. I've got your back on that. Cut for cut from beginning to end, I would rather put on Off the Wall than Thriller, but Thriller is the album. It is the one that changed for everyone.
You're absolutely right about that. Joe Levy, my friend, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right, former President Donald Trump is holding a rally in North Carolina. Let's listen.
Which is sort of standard. But I really would like to put that, because we're going to close up that border so fast. We're going to get those people out of here. And she's not going to do it. She couldn't do it if she wanted to. She wouldn't know what to do. They have open borders, and you know what? If things went bad today, you would have, and tomorrow, you would have open borders the first day of that, and you'll have, they have 21 million people that they let into our country. Many of these people are murderers. Think of it, 13,099 are murderers. The big drug lords, the prison population from countries all over the world, that if I ran a country, I'd say, get my prisons, open borders, they just walk in. No vetting, think of it, no vetting. We have no idea who they are. You're not allowed to ask. You're not allowed to ask. They just walk right into our country, and they kill people. You have murders. So you have 13,099 murders. Many of them have killed far more than one person. Bad things are going to happen. And you have terrorists at levels that we've never seen before. We had terrorists down the lowest we've ever. I had, in 2019, and this isn't done by me, this is done by Border Patrol, which, by the way, endorsed me. They gave me a great endorsement. They said, he's the greatest president ever. He's the greatest president, the head guy. Boy, Paul was great. He made a beautiful speech, but he said, he's the greatest president our country has ever had. I said, does that include Lincoln, Washington, and a couple of others? But it's very nice. But they gave me the strongest endorsement. And I have to say this, in the same little speech, they said she's the worst thing to ever happen to our country. And it's very hard for them to say that. She never made one phone call in 4 years to the Border Patrol. How we doing? I used to drive them crazy. They probably said, oh, no, it's the president again. Yes, yes, we're fighting our president. Yes. I used to drive them nuts. When I had nothing to do, I said, call the Border Patrol. And we got, just drop that chart, please. That chart, my all-time favorite chart. My all-time favorite chart, I love that chart. I sleep with that chart. I kiss it every night before I go. Because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the chart. If you take a look at the arrow on the bottom, that was the day I left office. That was the lowest illegal immigration we ever had. And I kept it pretty good. And then you take a look. And we had Mexico pay for their soldiers. They didn't want to pay for their soldiers. I said, you have to give us soldiers while we build the wall. And they paid so much money to us, and they said, we're not going to do that. They actually laughed at me when I suggested it. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a tariff of 100% on all your cars and everything that comes into the United States. They said, you know what they said? Sir, we would be greatly honored to let you have our soldiers free of charge. Thousands. How many would you need, sir? I said, as many as it takes. And they were great. They made a big contribution to our security, let me tell you. But they got to stop with, now we're talking Turkey. One of the first calls I'm going to make is to Mexico. You stop letting people come in through our border and come in through your southern border, and you stop it. Because Mexico, and I had a great relationship.
All right, former President Donald Trump at a rally there in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's got rallies later today in Pennsylvania, in both Reading and Pittsburgh. We'll update you throughout the day on both of the campaign's movements. That does it for us, but stay right where you are. Elizabeth Cook has more news from San Francisco. This is CBS News 24/7.